It was well beyond midnight, the kind of hour when silence feels almost physical, pressing against the walls, wrapping itself around your thoughts. The world outside had surrendered to sleep, and even the faint hum of distant traffic seemed softer, more distant, as though life itself had paused. For hours, I had been lying awake beneath the covers, shifting from one side to the other, unable to quiet the restless tide in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, thoughts resurfaced, unfinished conversations, lingering grief, unanswered questions. Eventually, I gave up on the idea of sleep. With a quiet sigh, I slipped out of bed, my feet meeting the cool wooden floor, and made my way toward the kitchen for something simple, a glass of water, maybe a small distraction from the heaviness of the night. As I stepped into the living room, a faint glow flickered against the walls. The television was still on, casting soft, shifting shadows that made the room feel both alive and strangely hollow. That gentle light was a reminder of why everything had felt so unsettled lately. Earlier that evening, my brother Casey had called. His voice had trembled in a way I hadn't heard before, raw, strained, almost desperate. He had asked if Paul could stay with me for a while, just until things settled, just until the storm quieted. The news about what Paul had endured struck me deeply. His wife, the woman he had loved for years, trusted without hesitation, built a life beside, had betrayed him in the most devastating way imaginable. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was the collapse of an entire world he thought was secure. Overnight, everything he believed in had shattered. Casey's son was caught in the wreckage too, confused and hurting, trying to make sense of emotions far too heavy for young shoulders. "Jessica," Casey had pleaded over the phone, his voice cracking. "He needs calm, he needs stability, just a little peace. I don't know where else he can find that right now." I didn't know Paul well. We had crossed paths at family gatherings, polite conversations over holiday dinners, brief smiles across crowded rooms. But I could see the damage in his eyes the moment he arrived. There was a quiet emptiness there, the kind that comes when trust is broken beyond repair. Our family had already endured more than enough loss, and somehow this felt like another cruel chapter in a story that never seemed to give us rest. 7 years earlier, I had faced my own devastating loss. My husband, Jacob, had been taken from me in a single, unforgiving moment. I was around 60 at the time. One ordinary afternoon, we were planning the final touches on our dream home, the house we imagined growing old together in, laughing in, filling with grandchildren someday. Then, without warning, a sudden heart attack stole him away. Just like that. The future we had carefully mapped out disappeared. The laughter, the plans, the shared mornings, it all dissolved into silence. And ever since then, that silence had followed me like a shadow. Loneliness became my constant companion. At first, I resisted it, then I endured it. Eventually, I simply learned to live beside it. But lately, that loneliness had grown heavier, sharper, almost suffocating. And that particular night felt like one of the loneliest of them all. So let me ask you something. Are you ready to step into this story with me? Because this isn't just another ordinary tale. It drifts into those blurred spaces where emotions overlap, where grief and longing intertwine, where quiet chaos lives beneath calm surfaces. Every moment might stir something unexpected inside you, something you didn't even realize was buried there. If you're craving a story that lingers beneath the surface, then lean in, stay with me. Let's walk through it together. When I moved farther into the living room, I saw Paul sitting quietly on the couch. He was completely absorbed in a romantic film playing on the screen, the soft glow highlighting the weariness in his expression. My first instinct wasn't discomfort, it was concern. I wanted him to feel even the slightest bit of peace while he was under my roof. If my home could offer him a breath of stability, then it was worth it. I had no idea that something subtle had already begun shifting beneath the surface. Paul noticed me and gently lifted his gaze. "Did I wake you?" he asked softly. There was exhaustion in his voice, but also something else, a quiet vulnerability. I stood there in my simple nightgown, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the hour. Yet, strangely, my clothing didn't feel important. What felt important was the weight inside my chest, the loneliness that had sharpened the moment I saw him sitting there alone. "No," I replied with a small smile, but the truth was I wasn't ready to return to my empty bedroom. Not yet. Maybe sitting for a few minutes with someone, anyone, would soften the night. Maybe sharing the quiet would ease the ache, even just a little. "Come sit," Paul said warmly, patting the empty space beside him. "Let's watch it together." The invitation felt natural, innocent, and yet something inside me stirred as I eased down beside him. The movie continued, unfolding its romantic storyline on screen, but my focus kept drifting. I became acutely aware of his presence, the warmth of him sitting just inches away, the faint scent of soap and night air clinging to his clothes. There was a subtle nervousness in his voice when he spoke, so different from the passion displayed in the film. As the on-screen couple leaned into each other, old memories I thought I had carefully locked away began resurfacing. Memories of Jacob's touch, his laughter, the comfort of being held. Then, almost absent-mindedly, I shifted, and my arm brushed against Paul's. The contact was brief, but it felt electric. I pulled back immediately, murmuring an apology, heat rising to my cheeks. He paused, then gave me a small, reassuring nod. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Really." Yet after that moment, the space between us felt undeniably smaller. We both pretended to focus on the film, but something had changed. The emptiness we carried seemed to sit between us, heavy and unspoken. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. That was the moment everything began shifting. Eventually, I excused myself and returned to my room, but sleep never came. I lay awake in darkness, replaying every second in my mind. When morning finally arrived, I felt drawn to the piano in the corner of the living room. For nearly 7 years, it had been my refuge. Each melody carried fragments of Jacob, soft reminders of love that once filled this house. My fingers moved gently across the keys, searching for comfort in familiar notes. Then I heard the faint sound of the front door. Paul had gone for an early walk. I continued playing, lost in the music, until I sensed someone standing nearby. I looked up. He was there, watching quietly. There was something different in his expression, not sadness, not desperation, gratitude. My fingers stilled. "Thank you," he said sincerely, his voice steady but warm. "That's honestly the best birthday gift I've received in years." "Birthday?" I repeated softly. He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "I turned 40 today." 40. The words lingered in the air. "Just hearing you play," he continued gently, "was the most beautiful thing I've experienced in a long time." Something inside me shifted then, something fragile, something I had thought was long gone. A warmth spread quietly through my chest. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a widow, not as someone surviving loss, but as a woman, as a person capable of connection again. I looked away, overwhelmed by the sudden rush of emotion. Because in that quiet morning light, standing beside an old piano with sunlight filtering through the windows, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe before. Maybe change wasn't impossible. Maybe healing didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it begins with something as small as a midnight conversation, or the brush of an arm, or a melody played on an ordinary morning that suddenly doesn't feel ordinary at all. And perhaps, without either of us realizing it yet, that was only the beginning.